everyone. Is that too loud? No? Awesome. Thank you all so much for being here. Raise your hand if you saw a seal outside. Raise your hand if you saw like 10 seals while just like walking down. I already thought this was the most beautiful conference location in the world, and then I saw a seal and it instantly made my day. So I hope this panel, this session does what that seal did for me, for you. For those of you who I don't know, my name is Marika Azoff. I'm the Good Food Institute's corporate engagement lead in the US. And what that means is I work with large food service companies, retailers, culinary associations and institutions, and individual chefs to help them understand the alternative protein industry, to help them develop and accelerate their alternative protein strategies. So, the title of today's session, Bridging the Gap Between Food Tech and Food Culture, is one that I'm very passionate about. It's very close to my heart. As we all know, food is emotional, food is cultural, it's nostalgic, and I'm a firm believer that increased collaboration with the food culture makers, the food influencers, the chefs, the culinarians, and the alternative protein world will only lead to a more sustainable, delicious, nutritious, culturally rich food system, which I know we are all working hard to build. So I could not be more excited for this session. We have like phenomenal panelists. I am by far the least interesting person on stage, so I'll get off soon. But the first panel we have is all about food culture, the history of food culture, our relationship with meat alternatives, how food culture is shaped. The second panel, we have an all-star group of chefs, and they'll all be talking about their personal relationships and journeys with alternative proteins, how chefs influence food culture, and how we can increase collaboration between these two worlds. So to kick off things, we are going to be joined by Professor Amy Bentley. Amy Bentley is a professor of food studies at New York University. She's a historian and author with interests in the social, historical, and cultural contexts of food. Her current research projects include the historical and cultural uses of meat and dairy substitutes, pretty fitting, a history of food in U.S. hospitals and the food production in religious communities. And the title of her presentation is A History of Foods That Act Like Other Foods, which is just the coolest session title or presentation title ever. After Amy's presentation, she'll be joined on the stage by Junjo Lee and Ali Bouzari. Junjo Lee is an author and food ethnographer for Food and Tech Worlds. Junjo says that everything connects through food, and she and her team use food as a portal to understand the worlds we are making and making ourselves ready for. And Ali Bouzari is a culinary scientist, an author, educator, and co-founder of Pilot R&D. As a chef with a PhD in food biochemistry, Ali has helped to lead the charge in changing the way we think about cooking by teaching and developing curriculum at top Ivy League universities and the Culinary Institute of America, and also by collaborating with some of the country's most innovative kitchens and restaurants, such as 11 Madison Park, Thomas Keller Group, State Bird Provisions, and many more. So, without further ado, let's hear from Amy Bentley.
Thank you. It's so nice to be here. And Marika and her group have been amazing in helping invite us and prepare us for this, what I hope is a really interesting and informative panel. Just to get started, I wanted to talk briefly about some research that I've done. And I title it Food That Acts Like Other Food. So what is food that acts like other food? I'm trying to see what I have in the slides here. Food that acts like other food are foods that substitute for other foods. And most logically, and for this conference, we're thinking about plants substituting for animal products, but that's not the total scope of it. Sometimes plants are substituting for other plants, and sometimes animal products are substituting for other products. There are a variety of reasons, and one of the main focus of my research is to explore the reasons behind these foods that act like other foods. And so here's an array of reasons that I will talk about briefly. First off, we'll start with the ancient Romans, and we all know that they were really great at throwing riotous banquets, engorging themselves, vomiting, the whole thing. But they loved playing with food. Food was a joke for them. They would create rich, elaborate recipes and serve them to guests as a demonstration of wealth and power. And so this is a recipe from a cookbook writer, Apicius. It's called patina of anchovy without anchovy. The substance isn't a plant, it's a fish. And so they're taking a fish, they're shaping it, they're creating another flavor to fool the guest, the eater, that it's an anchovy. Why? We don't really know, but we're thinking it's about cultural capital, demonstration of wealth and status, and then also just playful creativity. Moving right along in history, there are many, many religious and cultural influences for creating food substitutions. And I have two examples here. One is Buddhism in Asia, and one is medieval Christianity in Europe. So, of course, we know that the Buddhist tradition is largely vegetarian, and when guests or patrons would come to Buddhist monasteries, they would expect meat. And from that, you have the development of really interesting, unique food products, including seitan and mock duck, which is still consumed today in Asia. In medieval Christianity, about half of the calendar days were fast days. And that meant that people were not supposed to eat dairy, eggs, and meat. And through that came a lot of innovative product development and dish development, including a lot of nut milks. Fish was okay, and there was a broad definition of what fish was. But this is a picture of a recreation of a 1490 recipe for an egg. And that egg was made with jellied almond milk, and then the yolk was colored with saffron, ginger, and turmeric. Would not taste like an egg. The point, I think, is not the taste for that recipe. It's just a cultural, religious restriction influence forcing and shaping dishes and products. Moving to the United States in the early industrial period, you have religious groups that are not eating meat, primarily because it's seen as too heat-inducing and sexual, desire-producing, and so they're seeing meat eating as something to not do. And the Kellogg's and the Sanitarium in Battle Creek are the great example. And so they were trying to change American breakfast habits, which were largely meat, potatoes, eggs, hearty farm food. And so they developed their products, Protos and Granola, which are the forerunners of the breakfast cereals we know, granola and others. And they were instrumental through their products and the industrial development of them, changing American breakfast habits. Scarcity is also a really good reason why there are foods that act like other foods. The picture on the left is a real thing, mock apple pie. The recipe existed on the back of Ritz crackers forever. And apparently in the Depression, there were scarcity of apples. And so if you took crackers and put a lot of sugar and cinnamon and nutmeg on them, you could recreate the texture of apples in a baked apple pie. On the right is a bistec dish from Cuba that is also still consumed. It's the pith of a grapefruit that is breaded and fried and has, again, the texture of meat and is now a dish in its own right. You have industrial-produced meat and dairy substances that we're all familiar with. Infant formula, textured vegetable protein, margarine. These were considered scientific foods in the early 20th century. They were modern, they were seen as improvements, maybe even over nature, and were disseminated widely into culture in a period where science was seen as a human triumph and triumph over nature even. Zooming to the 1960s counterculture, you have a group of people in the United States who are seeing American meat eating as a form of imperialism, leading to the Vietnam War, leading to colonization, and are trying to consciously change their eating habits. Here you have the development of commercial products like the famous Boca Burger, Tofurky, Tofutti, and these are primarily marketed to vegetarians and found in health food stores, and so appealed to a small segment of the population. Then we get to the current day where we have plant-based proteins 2.0 and their extended family of products. And as we know in this conference, these are marketed to a mainstream audience, to people who are now finding value in eating less meat and dairy, who are understanding it in terms of ethics and its sustainability. Back to those ideas of culture, ethics, even religion, religious reasons. But I want to end with a slide on art and artifice. And just as the ancient Romans found creativity in food and creating foods that act like other foods, we do it today. We do it in fine dining for creating little dishes that seem to be one thing but really are another thing. And then the whole famous "is it cake" meme. Everything is cake. A foot, a belt. Like this whole world could be cake. And then I think it also just gets back to this idea of art, creativity, playfulness in food, and the artifice of foods that act like other foods. So just to conclude quickly, to make sense of these phenomenon, when we think about some of these, at least, food substitutes, the protein and dairy substitutes, we have to ask ourselves why. Humans are omnivores. We digest both animal and plant products. These animal products have been around for a long time, and meat is a luxury, high-valued food in most cultures across the globe. But of course, alternative proteins are seeing a great interest, in especially a younger population. They are having kind of a new life, but it's important to remember they have a long history with a lot of reasons embedded in their meanings and uses. They tend to mesh with some current health advice, and I think speak to this creative, playful, and involvement, human emotion to find delight in our food. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Hello. Hi. Good afternoon, humans. So, Amy, thank you for setting us up so perfectly for this. We are a weird trio, a delightfully weird trio, because we have three very unique lenses on how we look at food. So we thought that we might just introduce that really quickly as we grapple with some very big concepts. I am a scientist. I'm a biochemist. I tend to look at the ways that food is universal. It's all built on the same chemistry. I try to look for through lines in how food comes together and how that underpins how we cook it.
Yeah, my name is Junjo Lee, and I am a food ethnographer. So I look through the lens of cultural anthropology and work with companies to understand sensory, symbolic, functional, and emotional attributes of the foods we eat, and really to understand who we're becoming through our foods. You are what you eat is something I actually hold as truth.
And I'm what I call a cultural food historian. And so foods are not nutrients. They're also deeply embedded in culture that often gets developed and defined in us as children, but also because I'm looking at food over the long durée, as we called it, we understand and see food as changing, and food habits are changing with migration, technology, new ingredients. That cuisine is like just a big organism, living, breathing organism that just drops off certain things and absorbs other things. And so to think of authentic cuisine, we have to be careful to define what authenticity means, because it's always changing over the long period of history.
So, to set the stage for this panel, one of the things we wanted to talk about is we are currently we've entered now the period of unprecedented change. Not every food culture is going to have to change in the same ways, but it's very likely that every human on Earth is going to be confronted with some kind of dramatic change that they're going to have to make in their lives with how they deal with food. We're talking about protein, but I can tell you for my job, we have seen oats, raspberries, onions, and vanilla just vanish in different ways across the food industry in ways that hit home very deeply. Like Canada was out of oats for much of last year because of climate change induced drought. And so it's happening now. And we're going to have to reckon with how that changes the way that we look at food culture. We're boiling down all of food culture specifically to a little slice of protein today. We're not just going to talk about CPGs. We're going to talk about how this affects restaurant cooking and home cooking and meme recipes shared on TikTok. All of it is fair game. But we're going to focus on protein. And so just from a chemistry perspective, protein is our most touchy ingredient that you can make food with. It's very functionally dynamic. It's very sensitive to its environment. It's one of the most complex types of molecules that we can eat. And it's also indispensable. So when you look at semiconductors and petroleum engineering and all that stuff, there's a high ceiling for material innovation. In food, it's much lower. There's a lot of stuff that we can do with protein, and that's a journey we're just getting started on. But we still have to eat protein. There are a lot of alternative proteins. There are no alternatives to protein that we can biologically deal with in mass quantities. And so a lot of our protein obsession at this conference is set by that. But one of the first things that I wanted to ask you all about and kind of set the stage for is the slab of protein paradigm does not feel necessarily universal. And so my first question is, how does culture, history, the grounding of a population of people affect their relationship to protein and how they get it?
Maybe start with history and then ethnography.
Sure. Well, this is where my anthropologist hat comes in, so I don't know if I'm going to overlap with you. But Americans, when you ask most Americans what is a meal, and particularly dinner, most or a majority would say a thing of meat in the middle and two sides, one a green vegetable or a colored vegetable and one a starch. And there's a grammar to that. It's called A plus 2B. And if one of those is gone, it doesn't feel so much like a meal to people. You can give someone a bowl of carrots, but they would go, I'm kind of hungry, or a big pound of bacon. They would go, that's not really a meal. And so it's an internal dynamic cultural grammar for a lot of people to think of a dinner, a meal, in that way. Now, that's not universal. There are people in other countries or in our country that see meals a different way. And the equation there is core, fringe, legume. So the core is not the meat. The core is the starch now. It's the rice or the fufu, other pasta, bread. The fringe is the flavoring agent, and that can be kimchi, that can be salsa, that can be a relish. It can be meat. Meat is the flavoring agent rather than the main centerpiece. And then the legume is just the legume. It's a chickpea or it's a pinto bean. It's a soy. And so that kind of meal tends to be served more mixed and maybe in a bowl as opposed to a plate. So I think if we think of the grammar of meals, we can locate mainstream American habits and think about how people might reimagine those, I guess.
So, yes. And since we are what we eat, if you look at demographic trends and the fact that the U.S. is becoming increasingly diverse, it means that we are eating in an increasingly diverse patterns. And so we've been just following demographic trends and looking at where patterns are. And I'm Korean. And it used to be when I grew up in Korea, I'm bicultural. When I grew up in Korea in the 80s and 90s and McDonald's came to Korea back then, Koreans would say, that, eating a McDonald's hamburger was a snack, that they didn't actually have a meal until they had rice. So rice was the center of our cuisine. And it's interesting, I watch a lot of K-drama because I'm actually an introvert, and after interviewing a lot of people, I go home and stay in bed and just watch 18 hours of K-drama. But when you watch what they're eating on K-drama, to express modernity, capitalism, corporate power, they have steak and wine. And then when they're being emotional and very Korean, they have, soju and Korean food. And so I think in that way, we see a lot of different approaches. So this conference, Alt Protein, I think it already frames a very Western perspective on how we eat.
Absolutely. And it frames it as a binary, right? It's either, and this is the thing, I work with restaurant chefs as much as I work with CPG companies. And if you were an alien beamed down to like a Ralph's, you would think that all of humanity was either just crushing pork rinds and beef jerky or kale chips and rice cakes. In the CPG world especially, maybe by necessity, but that's a subject for a different panel, there is this like forced binary, or this perceived binary of people are either staunchly traditional protein or staunchly alternative protein. So maybe my question is, are there truly, at least in this country, let's frame it in the United States, are there truly a lot of binary eaters, people who are like team animal protein or team alternative protein?
Well, in my research, I'm the food ethnographer for Google, and I talk to a lot of Googlers about what they eat to support the free food program at Google. And I don't run across too many carnivores, like strictly. A lot of omnivores and plant-based, but mostly a lot of people who go back and forth. So I think the way the eaters think of it is it's just different types of cuisine. I mean, so cuisine used to be country-based, nation-based. Korean, I'm Korean, so I eat Korean food. And now I think we're more defined by social groups, social interests, activities, morals, ethics, and also the huge health and wellness segment, the weight managers and the optimizers and biohackers. So I think cuisine is defined by a lot of other things than just our homelands or what our grandmas ate. And so I see a lot of people who go between occasions and, very non-binary, very ambiguous.
Yeah, I would agree. I would say we all have different personas and we present different versions of ourselves in different contexts. And so we have our aspirational persona and our maybe a front stage eating habit and a backstage eating habit. People say they eat certain things, and that is probably different from what they actually eat. It's actually very hard to do nutrition research because it's very hard to actually get an accurate representation of what people eat, how much they eat, when they eat, etc. That's okay, actually, because I think we're complex. Human beings are complex, and I think if we just build that into our research and think about, as Junjo was saying, multiple flexibility and different ways of eating, I think it makes sense, actually. I think you're very rigid and binary when it feels like a code that helps you dispel the chaos in the world. There's so much choice. There's so many options. To follow a very strict rule of eating is a relief to people in some ways. And so people have all sorts of interesting rules. I don't eat anything white. I don't eat gluten. I'm not really sure what gluten is, but I don't eat it. I only eat, between this hour and this hour. These are all just desperate ways to try to control our eating and make sense of it. And then, of course, there's ethical reasons and rules for eating as well.
Especially making sense of eating in our post-industrial food system where food is available 24/7 and we don't eat together that often. We eat mostly oftentimes alone, on the go, where, meals are kind of who knows and what are snacks anymore.
Yeah, and all the rules controlling our eating have kind of gone out the window. We now eat in our cars. We eat while we're walking. We eat in the library. We eat, we eat insomnia cookies at, late at night. There's just, the rules have dissolved, and so we're working to create new rules, and those are different for different people.
When eating neatly in a car is inevitably accepted into the Olympics as a new event, I will represent the United States. So I think a lot of the companies in this conference and in this room, and a lot of the focus is, I don't know, whatever wave of alternative protein this is, if we start in thousands of years ago and we're here, whatever wave this is, will eventually climax and crash, and we'll move on to the next wave. There will be a point where there is a excellent alternative protein chicken nugget and ice cream and melty cheese and all of those things that there's already been a lot of successes. At some point, a lot of this innovative firepower is going to be refocused on whatever the next frontier is. I'm really excited for that because plants can do a lot of stuff that is not just be a hunk of protein. What is that going to look like in the culture? Because we talked about the kind of false binary of are you a carnivore or are you a herbivore? What about the fact that associating yourself as eating an alternative protein, it is an easier to define box to put yourself in to say it's a chicken nugget versus, and just spelled chicken with an extra K, versus something that we don't have a name for yet, something that's completely new and we have to make our own value system around it for the very first time. How does that grow? How do cultures adopt completely new stuff?
Go for it, Junjo.
Please, Amy. How do we change the way we eat? How do we shift or bend culture?
How do we accept it? How do we name it? How do we contextualize it? How does all that stuff happen?
Well, I have one example from some research that I did a while ago, and that is I examined World War II food rationing in the United States. So this was the only time in the United States where there was mandatory restriction of food for the civilian population. And a lot of that emphasis surrounded meat, because meat was eaten widely, it was highly desirable, and a lot of the food needed to be siphoned off for the military overseas, for allies and newly developed countries. So the government, I examined all the government records, and they didn't want the message to be about deprivation. Don't eat meat. If you eat it, you're bad. They wanted it to be positive messages. They wanted to explain to people why it was necessary. So a lot of the propaganda, and a lot of times we think of propaganda as a negative word, but this was just information with a slant. You're doing it for this really important war effort. You're doing it so that soldiers can have food. You're doing it so that your fellow citizens can have a fair share. You're doing it because it's the right thing to do. You can also produce food at home through victory gardens. So they were trying to make the message positive and complex and then have it mean something to people. There was a need for it as well. And they expected people to sacrifice and told people that. So if you maybe applied that example to, say, the current crisis, maybe we could ask people to sacrifice. Maybe we could show them the moral imperative. Maybe we could provide them with alternatives and have them internalize the issue rather than just trying to tell them that it's not a big deal or trying to get them to purchase another thing, but just kind of make it embedded in ideas about democracy and civic responsibility. Maybe that's asking way too much of the government, but the end of the story is that people really did change their eating habits. They really ate less. They turned to other foods, and they stood up, and they felt proud that they were contributing to the war effort in that way. Then that war ends, and guess what? Meat consumption goes way back up, even higher than before. So, interesting, ends to think about and maybe apply to the current case.
Real quick, how quickly did it go back up? Was it like, the war's over, hooray, steaks for everyone?
That is really interesting because actually the corporations and the meat producers were very, very anxious for rationing to be lifted. We got to get it off, we got to get it off, we got it off. They were afraid of a variety of things. Consumers were actually writing to the government and saying, please don't take it off. Please let us continue with this for a while because it's helping. I'm feeling like I'm contributing to people overseas who really are in dire need with famines. But they took it off pretty fast. In England, we had rationing for 10 years after. They took it off pretty quickly, and it shot up pretty quickly. It's hard to control your own eating. It's just really hard.
So I have an example from a more recent category, which is dairy. And I did a lot of research for Dairy Management, Inc., as well as alternative alt dairies. And now people, when they ask you, what milk do you drink, it's a choice. And there's an assumption that there's a choice. And for a really long time, there was soy milk. Remember that? In Tetra Paks in the shelf-stable section. And then what they started doing is putting it in dairy milk, cow milk cartons, and moving it to refrigerated. And then soy still didn't catch on. And then almond milk and coconut came out. And I'm convinced that we're all drinking alternative milks. I mean, they were doing it long before in Brooklyn, in coffee shops, independent coffee shops, and squeezing, their own milks and stuff like that. But almond joy. So when I would interview consumers broadly for the large guys now in alternative milks and talking to mainstream consumers, they said, well, soy is kind of, I don't know about it. There's all these problems. It's kind of foreign. It's oriental. But almond, I know almond. I love the taste of almond. And so we saw some adoption. And coconut. And I put a picture of Almond Joy and saying, I think this is why the category is going to continue growing. And then it became oat and pistachio and a lot of other things. But I think there is a sense of familiarity, of use, convenience, but also options and taste. So that took about, 20 years?
So almond was like the anchor point that helped people find a way in?
Yes, almond.
We talk about a concept that is just completely made up. We call 2 degrees of weird. In CPG product development, a lot of times you're not able to give any context to the person who's buying your thing. And so a common conversation with brands looking to launch something is, we want to be differentiated, but we don't want to be alienating. And one of the ways that folks often talk about that is you are allowed 1 degree of weird before you get alienating. So you're allowed something that's a combination of aromas that you haven't seen before, but it's a protein bar. You're allowed something that's a new shape, but it's cookies and cream. And the more degrees of weird you have, the more leapfrogging that has to happen, the more things start to get a little bit touchy. What if we're just, again, in imagining a scenario, hopefully decades from now, where stuff gets really upside down.
Can I just add one more?
Yeah, go for it.
So yes, but it wasn't always the case in America. Like in America, people ate what they knew. I like what I eat, and I eat what I like. And very few people went off that. And then we started seeing an interesting phenomena. I was doing a project for Kraft Breakthrough Innovations, and there was a target consumer who just didn't buy their cash cow like brands. And they wanted to understand who this consumer was, and we initially called it the new age consumer. We soon found out it was millennials. And we were doing research with parents and their kids, and kid you not, in Chicago, we heard parents confess to us, I want my kids to like a lot of things. Our society is global now, and they have to learn how to eat a lot of things. If they only eat what's familiar, it's going to limit their opportunity, their chances in the world. We also heard this from Indian consumers who also said that. They can't just eat mom's food. They have to learn how to eat, because what are they going to eat out there in the world? And so we saw an actual cultural shift in really actually teaching ourselves and our kids to like familiar with a twist, to like trying new. It was actually part of cultural shifts in other domains.
So our learning curve is changing. Like, we're getting more malleable as generations progress?
I think so. I think the change is happening faster and faster now.
I think so. I think post-1965 immigration, when all of a sudden, there were substantial populations from Asia, from Latin America, from Africa, opened up the options, the materiality of food that was available. So little strip malls had pho shops, and that just made it easier to have a larger array of flavors and tastes. But also, humans are pretty conservative. We're very conservative about what we put in our body, and that makes sense because that has served us evolutionarily. We don't want to poison ourselves. And so we like innovation, we like new things, but we want some familiarity. So it can be new, but it has to have an analog. It's a bean, but I know what a bean is, but it's a bean I've never had. Or it's a fruit that's sort of like a melon, but has a cherry twist. We need to have reference points so that we are a little less worried about what we're putting in our body.
Although my more recent research with Gen Z is showing that maybe that's not,
Gen Z is just going to jump off of stuff and see what's at the bottom?
They really do. We have, after Food Network, Whole Foods, and, chefs and being cultural icons and influencers, we're a lot more articulate about food than we were 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And kids are learning about food home ec is rebranded as teaching kitchens now in schools. And there's school gardens. And I think there's just a lot more exploration and experimentation. And, as we are merging with machines, what we eat is who we are. And so I'm kind of curious how that might change.
So when I first started going to conferences and hearing folks speak about the future of food, it was a lot about how us millennials are going to break everything and ruin everything. And maybe we did. It's very interesting that there seems to be a flip where the attitude towards Gen Z and subsequent generations is becoming more optimistic. They can learn and change and embrace the world as it is rather than trying to force it to be what they want, all these things. Let's follow that and say Gen Z is going to show us the way. Let's assume that and entertain that for a second. Can they do it by themselves? So let's again assume that whatever the cultural change there needs to be for humans to survive and for there to be polar bears for our grandchildren, again, that can be different for each culture, but let's assume there needs to be change. Can a single generation take the reins and yank us all into the future, or do you need multi-generational buy-in for food culture to change in most ways?
Well, Amy and I were talking yesterday, and she was telling me about her children. And I think you should tell the audience about.
Well, I have lovely children. They're in their 20s, and they're all amazing. One,
Soylent.
One was the Soylent rep in his college, and now is into Buddhist meditation and mindfulness. One is in food tech, but she just donated a kidney for the common good, and the other one worked on a farm and is a teacher. I mean, they're all just very soulful people, and food really matters to them, and the state of the world matters to them. So that gives me hope, actually. They're just lovely people, and I'm more than happy to turn the reins over to them.
Yeah, so just listening to your children, they're motivated in many different ways in what to eat. Yeah, I can't even imagine donating a vital organ, but I think the question's a great provocative question. I think it takes all of us and to change who we eat. I mean, some people think plants and trees are sentient and living beings as well. Air-based fats, I just tried it yesterday and quite impressed. But if you think about Earth is the greatest high-tech, creator of all our foods. We're all air-based. I mean, if you really think about it at some way or so. So I think food will reflect our ideas, who we are, what we care about, who we want to become. So I think if we care about these things, we will change how we eat. And we love our children. And no generation is in isolation. We're all connected.
No, and I'll add briefly to that I read a study where you need to get about 25% of the population to create a so-called tipping point that then will create a trend. We used to not wear seatbelts, and then we wore seatbelts, and now everybody wears seatbelts. We used to smoke in restaurants, and now we don't. So that's a combination of cultural change and some carrots and some sticks on the part of policy and government. And I feel like if all parties work together, we can make meaningful change.
So we have to wrap up, but I think that is a beautiful, optimistic note to end on. Whenever it feels like whatever good fight you're fighting is hopeless, just think about how long it's been since you came home from eating pizza, just reeking of Marlboro smoke.
It's true.
So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much for, I think, kind of taking us out of our alt-protein bubble a little bit to talk about food culture more broadly. I think we probably all agree that we could have listened to the three of you just chat for a long time. So I am now joined by an all-star panel of chefs. We have Michelin stars, top chef, celebrity status, restaurateurs, so much talent and brilliant minds on this stage. So we have Chef Spike Mendelsohn, Chef Nelson Herman, Chef Srijith Gopinathan. And I'm going to let them all introduce themselves briefly and share with us kind of about the first time you were introduced to the world of alternative proteins. What intrigued you and interested you? What maybe made you shy away or did you struggle with a bit? And how has your perception or your alt protein journey evolved over time? We'll start with you, Spike.
Sure. Do you want to do intros all the way around first? Or?
Just introduce yourself and answer, and then pass it on to the next person.
I am... most people refer to me as Chef Spike Mendelsohn. I'm a chef in the D.C. area and a co-founder of currently two startups. One is Eat the Change, which is a CPG company both in beverage and planet-based snacks. And the other is Plant Burger, which has about 13 locations. It's a fast food burger chain restaurant that focuses on plant-based foods 100%. I have a little bit of a policy background and meld in food advocacy a lot, and that's actually how I got my first introduction to plant-based foods, was on a similar panel like this one at GW in Washington, D.C., and it was about food policy, and Seth Goldman, which I'm sure is no stranger to most of the people here, that is formerly from Honest Tea and Beyond Meat, kind of snuck some Beyond Meat burgers under my chair. He gave me a little Honest Tea with it as well, and kind of perked my curiosity. I'm probably one of the least likely chefs early on in my career to be standing on a stage right now talking about alternative proteins. I never thought I'd be here. But really for me, it was my curiosity of what he had slipped under my seat that kind of piqued my interest. The fact that my wife is actually vegan it helped. She's been, she was begging at the time for a vegan burger that, had the same aggressiveness of a regular meat burger. And Beyond Meat, took it home, grilled it up, and to my surprise, I was super impressed. I mean, there were definitely some things, it wasn't perfect. But at the time, I was kind of amazed on how the alternative protein just kind of caramelized. It had this Maillard reaction, which is, introduces flavor to products when you sear them. And, it bled a little bit, and it just tasted wonderful. So, it was that quick little interaction with Seth that really piqued my curiosity behind these foods. And then shortly after that, I was so curious to learn more that I started working and developing content for Beyond Meat, and I launched the Beyond Sausage at Whole Foods when it finally hit the market. So yeah, that's kind of my introduction.
Did anyone slip any product under Chef Spike's chair today? Because that sounds like it would.
Listen, that is the way to my heart. Slip something under my chair right now.
Yeah, I don't know. Everyone look under. We'll see. I love that. Chef Nelson.
All right. I'm Chef Nelson Herman. I'm born and raised in New York City, Washington Heights, but I'm out of Oakland, California. I have two beautiful spots, Alamar Dominican Kitchen and Sobremesa, a beautiful, sexy Afro-Latin cocktail lounge. I got introduced to alternative meats a couple years ago, right before the pandemic, and it was Impossible Foods. And I was supposed to do a web commercial for them. They wanted to really diversify their product and showcase how you can use their products in so many different ways in different cultures. So for me, it's using it in an Afro-Latin recipe. And when I looked at it, I was, very hesitant, like a lot of chefs were back in days, or still are. But I was like, okay, let me give this a try. Let me eat this product in something that I enjoy eating as a kid, something my mom would cook for me or my grandma. And the way it cooked, it just blew my mind, the flavors I absorbed, and it was like eating something nostalgic for me. The flavors that were there, cooking a beautiful rice and bean dish with the plantains that I just enjoy and get best memories of my mom cooking for me and my family. And it changed my whole mindset. I have the product. I want to learn more. Being older, being over 40 now, we have to eat a lot healthier. And I've never been the person who just eats all vegetables, unfortunately. So this is a product where what I really enjoyed, it was their motto. It wasn't made for vegans. It was made for meat eaters who want a break. And that got me. I was like, okay, this makes sense. This is the way the future's going. And it's just so innovative and amazing the way it was. So I use it in my restaurants, not in many dishes, but here and there. I'm still open to learning more. I'm still open to using it more in my food and my culture. And I'm really interested in the way it's going to go.
Really quick, how did Impossible approach you? Like, how did that relationship start?
Yeah, it was kind of, I'm not sure. I think it was...
Snuck it under his bed. I think.
Pretty much.
No, is anything goes
I think
here.
it had to do a lot with my mindset and the change I was doing in my career. A lot of us always came from cooking more European-centric food throughout our careers to be well-known, to be on Top Chef. But it was a point in my life where I was evolving, and I wanted to showcase more of who I am, where I came from. And I think they really enjoyed that. And then a lot of the community efforts I was doing in Oakland, too, and just being out there in the industry.
Thank you. Chef Sri?
Thank you. before I introduce myself, I just want to thank the panelists who sat here before. How interesting it was. I would pay for that.
Woo.
Thanks a lot.
Agreed.
Especially it's all great. One thing which really hit me right in my heart is when she's talked about kimchi and rice, the flavors and all those things. So what I remember is my grandmother, this was 15 years ago, 20 years ago when I used to cook at home with her. So she used to make a good fish curry, and she used to tell me, listen, you can have 2 big bowls of rice with a little bit of this curry. So I used to think, what the hell does that mean? I mean, I'm supposed to eat 2 big bowls of rice with a little bit of fish curry? See the cultural thing? It's like eating one whole burger versus a bowl of rice with a little bit of fish curry. It's really clicked me when she said that about kimchi and rice. Thank you. Thanks a lot. So coming back, my name is Srijit Gopinathan. I'm 99% a chef, and I'll tell you what is that 1% now. So I started my career in India, moved to Maldives, Middle East, a little bit in Singapore, Europe, and then ended up in San Francisco in 2007. I was the executive chef at the Campton Place restaurant, which later on became a 2-star Michelin restaurant, and then I worked there for almost a decade. I moved out and I formed my own company and created like three restaurants. First one is in Etan in Palo Alto, which is an upscale. I'm confused now. What is this whole scale thing? I'm still learning. I would call it they call it now upscale casual. So anyways, and I opened a new one recently, 6 months ago in San Francisco called Copra in San Francisco. Thank you. Thank you. And a couple of other, I have an English little pub in Lodi as well as in Sunnyvale, a bunch of small gigs. And most importantly, coming to the last thing, I'm also inventor and chief culinary officer for Sempera Organics, which created this product called Mamu, which is an alt meat made out of, which is basically fungi-based food source, which is created in right here in California. I don't know how many of you got to taste it. We had it, I think, yesterday as well as at some point today, I'm guessing, here. Anyways, so that's my story. My introduction to alt meat, very interesting story. I don't know how many of you are from India. There you go. So I got introduced to alt meat. I didn't know the name then. I can tell you that it was certainly an alt meat. It was some 30 years ago. I'm 45, by the way, full disclosure. 30 years ago, we had a company called Nutrella back home, which used to produce these what's it called? Defatted soy flour-based extruded product, which is a byproduct of soy bean oil making. So they probably thought it was a good idea to dump it in India, where there are 1.5 billion people. It gets consumed easily. So I don't know if it's good or bad. Those days, it was the cheapest meat available. Meat, like you both said, it was an expensive commodity then. I mean, we couldn't afford it. We used to kill 1 or 2 chicken in a year, and that's the meat we had. Otherwise, it's mostly alt meat. So I'm one of the earliest adopters of alt meat story. So that used to come in little teeny balls as well as granules. We used to steep them in water and then make every possible thing you can make out of what you would actually make with any meat, like chicken curry to roast chicken to all kind of stuff. So that's my first intro. And then post that, of course, the obvious big boys today in market I got introduced in recent past. But I have to say, I was not very happy with it when it started. Like first iteration of it, I wasn't happy. So after eating the first time, I told myself, this is almost like buying an EV and charging it using a diesel generator. You know what I'm saying? I'll explain it. So you're trying to buy an alternative meat as a healthy alternative, but it's not actually a healthy alternative. But the new iterations have changed a lot. They have reduced the number of ingredients they use. They made it a lot more better and healthier. I must say, things have gone like it's gotten a lot better now. So that's my little story. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you all. I love hearing the origin stories, whether it's a slip under the chair or the first time I met Chef Sri and Nirmal, his co-founder. Nirmal told me that he went into one of your restaurants and just loved the food so much and went back and introduced himself to Chef Sri, and correct me if I'm getting this wrong, said, like, we're going to work together someday. I'm not sure how, but we're going to do it. And now they have Sempor Organics and developed Mamu, which I believe you will all try in a couple hours. Sorry if I'm wrong about that. And I love hearing all the moments and possible approaching you right at the right time in your career. Take note, everyone who has an alt protein company. The next question I want to ask is, within your businesses, how do you strike the balance between, chefs always want to be the next person to do the next hot, cool thing, to have the next cool concept. How do you strike the balance between listening to your customers, listening to customer demand, and introducing new things and trend setting? And particularly interested in this in the context of alternative proteins and introducing plant-based menu items. But yeah, how do you strike that balance? We'll start again with you, Spike.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's definitely a great balance. I mean, my job as a chef of Plant Burger, and my partner actually, Chef Coletti's in there too, so we work on this stuff together. But it's to make food delicious, to make these plant-based foods delicious. Now, we serve 100% plant-based food at Plant Burger. So for us, what's really exciting is that, if you ask me 5-7 years ago, if I was able or capable to make the most delicious plant-based burger that's equally as indulgent as any other burger on any other menu, the answer would probably be no, but after meeting Seth and after doing research and after meeting a lot of different cheese companies and mayo companies, we were really confident that we were able to make something that's just as delicious and doesn't sacrifice anything. The other part of that is that this space specifically has a lot of fast innovation happening in it, and that's part of the job that I think is really fun and actually helps us drive our business at Plant Burger, right? If we were just stagnant in the plant-based space and had no innovation to kind of offer the consumers, to get them a little bit more curious about what this new era of food, fast foods, is we could bring to them, we would have less repeat customers. So for us, it's a fine balance. We have a very our menu mix is very small, but it's really delicious and concise. And then, we're able to, ahead of time, we work on a year calendar. And for instance, for 2024, we have all our LTOs already kind of organized, right? So we have our partners. We're launching a meaty sandwich, for instance, that has something special on it. We'll use other companies, and we did a mind-blown crab sandwich just about a month ago. So for us, it's striking the right balance, but also engaging and keeping curiosity. But that's what I love about this space. It's just the innovation never stops, and we're always able to introduce new items, as well as like what these huge commitments to the planet mean, so people need to be reminded about that.
Yeah, I agree, Chef. For me, it's about how do I stay in trends, how to bring more business. We are business owners, so we want to stay on these trends, but we also want to change it. I think the way I personally want to change it is how to introduce all proteins in a different culture way, right? Showcasing it for more storytelling. How can I tell a story with this product? How can I put in my story within that, or memory and inspiration, or start a trend that's going to be the next hotspot, or Instagrammable, TikTok. But it still has to come from something. So it has to have the love into it. So for me, it's just how do I take this? How do I add some love? How do I showcase it within my concept and keep pushing that forward? And I think the way it's going, like Chef was saying, there are more healthier innovations with these new products, and I'm excited to use it more. But how do, we can still be ourselves using these Ultimates.
For me, especially with all proteins in the menu, it's a new stuff to most people. It's not something which has been here forever. So the way I test it out is basically I do a very familiar, sure shot success rate dish. I pick a dish or I pick a sauce. I mean, I'll give you an example, like a stupid example. I've not done that. Anybody in this who eats food knows what a butter chicken is when they go to an Indian restaurant. Like very basic stuff. Like something as far as that, I mean, that basic. Go that basic when it comes to a dish. Take as basic as that, and then work an alt meat with that. So your chances of success is very high in that, because it's very hard to actually go convince somebody, hey, listen, I got this alt meat from the best guy in the world who made this. Nobody is going to believe you that. But you have to, the way to lure him or her into it is basically have something which they would love otherwise, and then add the alt meat to it, and then try it out. You mostly will get, your success rate would be high. And another thing for me is being my kind of restaurants where my menu has 25 to 35 items on the menu. I go ahead and take full-on risk by adding a menu in our way I want it and run it for a week or 2 weeks. The POS will tell you how is it doing. Servers will tell you how is it doing. It just doesn't take much time. And you basically play it safe. Those are the ways I test it out. And another alternative is also trying it out I've always noticed in menus, we talk about healthy eating, whole food, blah, 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 blah. Moment you go hit a restaurant, the first thing you order is fried calamari. In whatever fancy form it is, you order that. You know what I mean? You tend to do it. Simple. So mock a dish like that. Make a little fried cutlet out of it and try it out. So that's the first step. Get them in the door of alt meat. You know what I mean? Once they get used to it, once they know what it is, then move them up. Promote them. That's how I do it. Those are the few ways to do it. I'm sure chefs are all very smart. They come up with their own ways. These are a few of my ways. I can sit here and talk about ways I cheat people. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I don't mean that. But the ways to, you cannot stand in the front of the restaurant and scream alt meat, alt meat. If it's good, then prepare it well and serve it. It'll sell. If it doesn't sell, then either you did a miserable job or the guy who made the alt meat did a miserable job. Something went wrong.
Is it selling? How's it doing?
Both my places, it's selling hot.
That's amazing. Congratulations.
And one more thing. Another thing to do it, if you really want to do it, is put it on that first item on the menu. Just get it on the menu first. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah, menu placement is huge. And instead of relegating it to a separate vegetarian or vegan section, right, just having it right there. There's a reason why you put that on as the first menu item, right? It's signaling this is good. You should get it.
Yeah. And serve your servers ample amount of it. Like first few days, just keep serving them.
I love it. Yes, yeah. Educating your staff, or by educating I mean feeding really good food to them and getting them excited about it. And I think that also goes back to, I love Ali's 1 degree of weird. That's what you were speaking to is having that, tapping into that familiarity, which is what meat analogs are doing, right? Is tapping into that familiarity. And you all represent different segments of the food service industry, you have different cultural backgrounds, different cuisines, and so tapping into your respective degrees of familiarity, I think it's really, really interesting to learn about. The next question is for you, Spike. So the first plant burger was in a Whole Foods, if I'm correct, right? And so your customers got to come try Beyond Burgers or your products, your menu items prepared deliciously by chefs, and then they could go and purchase them in a retail setting. And that's unique. I feel like that you were one of the first kind of companies to be in a retail space like that. Well, I want to hear more about that, but the question I'm getting to is how do chefs influence the CPG space, the consumer packaged goods space, and in turn, how can the CPG space influence chefs? And we've heard a little bit about the latter, but curious to hear your take.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So we'll give you a quick little history on Plant Burger. I mean, we opened our first location in Silver Spring, Maryland, inside of Whole Foods, inside of a 110 square foot little kiosk, and we went gangbusters. We were doing about $6,000 a square foot. And for those who know, Whole Foods measures everything by square footage based on success. So for us, we were the shiny new success in Whole Foods, and kind of have breaking this model through the friends relationship that they have. These friends relationships is they get local chefs to open up little kiosks with certain menu items, for instance. No brand had ever just went in and developed an entire brand behind a kiosk. So that was that was something that was very influential for us. COVID happened, as we all know, and we were, had one store open, and we decided, to expand. We had an opportunity, since Whole Foods was deemed essential, to open up about 10 other locations inside Whole Foods. So we did that during the 2 years of COVID. But what was really amazing is that a lot of people were looking at their diets during COVID as well, right, and what they were eating. And one of the phenomena for us was that, we became kind of a proxy for analog meats or any type of plant-based foods that were being sold on the shelves at Whole Foods. So consumers that hadn't quite taken that one hit, for instance, or were unfamiliar with the space or had never eaten anything, came to the plant burger that they heard, this amazing Top Chef was running, and gave us a try. And, and I think that's, one thing where chefs really could kind of help push along CPG and alternative meats is that, I could give an animal protein burger to 10 of you here, and one of you is going to cook it better than the other 9. And the same thing goes for plant-based foods. We can give you, all each Beyond Meat burgers, and one of you is going to cook it better than the other 9. And, for us at Plant Burger, we were able to take this product, make it super indulgent and delicious, and have this wow factor behind our menu item. And then the questions start happening, right, at the counter. Well, what is this product? How do you cook it, and how do you serve it? So, this relationship with Whole Foods all of a sudden became very unique, where we were kind of the ultimate taster test for anyone that was interested in plant-based foods. And it did start with Beyond Meat Burger, because that was the, mainly the product that we were serving. But then we launched Beyond Sausage, right? And we started getting similar things. And then other alternative companies started to kind of hear about Plant Burger in the press. So we launched the Just Egg breakfast sandwich, for instance. We did the Gardein burger. We got Nugs. So we started getting all these products that we were able to have like these little mini launches within Whole Foods, and really give them some valuable information on how their alternative protein performed at the restaurant, what were the likes and dislikes of it. So that I think is one way, that we've done it. And, the other way around is, the CPG world has definitely, I'm in both of these worlds right now, right? I'm in Eat the Change, which, I could blame Seth Goldman for. He dragged me into the CPG world. I dragged him into the restaurant world. I think I owe him one for that one. But it's interesting how, it's made me look at our entire supply chain and how we order food or the foods that we are offering at the restaurant and what we can do different at the restaurant to work a little bit more effectively, right? And I'll give you one more thing that I think that was really interesting is that, one of the other panels was talking about price parity and food service, right? And, one thing for us in our industry is, we get pitched a lot of ingredients, but a lot of times these ingredients won't work well because they're priced too hard, right? So having an open relationship with chefs and really learning on what works for them as a product in their restaurants. So for instance, Beyond Meat was really expensive, right? And the portion size was a little bit too big for what we could afford to put on the plate. So having an open relationship with Beyond Meat, being able to work with them to get a puck size that was, proportionally perfect for us and priced appropriately really makes our business work for us. So I think that, I can go on forever on this subject, but I'll pass it on to the other chefs. So.
All right. Yeah. Well, I want, if anyone has something to add, you should. And for the sake of time, I want to make sure we get to the last two. Anyone have anything burning on that the CPG space topic?
I'm not a big CPG guy. I'm still learning it. I'll pass that.
Okay, amazing. We could go on and on and on. So you are speaking to an audience of mostly non-chefs. Raise your hand if you're a chef. Yay! Okay, I lied. We have 3 or so. But
we love you.
Mostly non-chefs, and many of the people in the audience are entrepreneurs, have their own alternative protein companies, work for an alt protein company, and I think what you were just speaking to, Spike, is the importance of like those conversations, and not. Alt protein companies not necessarily like approaching chefs way late in the process once they have already formulated, they've built their factory, and they're like, all right, this is it, promote it, put it on your menus, but like that conversation and developing together the way that Sri Nirmal brought you in, that you've collaborated as well. So going down the line, we'll start with Sri this time. If you could offer a little bit of advice to the alt protein companies in the room for how they can more meaningfully engage with chefs, what would it be?
Yeah, great question, actually. A couple of things. One, show that through, if you're somebody who's actually manufacturing an alt protein, show it, number one, through the product. Number one, 85% of today's alt meat is all in a ground meat format, correct? Am I right or wrong? Mostly
I actually don't remember the exact stats. I think it's not quite 80, but you're on it. The majority is still beef alternatives.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ground meat, right? Honored. So I'm just saying from that angle. So number one to do is keep it as neutral as possible. Like leave it as an empty canvas. Don't overdo in that, because people like flavors in it, but don't over flavor it, because chefs mostly like to just do their own thing in it. So that's one thing to do. Second thing is, I personally feel less is more, less ingredients the better when you create something like that. Third is, this is again based on what I did with Mamu, as well as what I like to do. I like to see. Have a lot of real food. I don't mean to say there's unreal food. Have a good ratio of unprocessed food in the mix. I'll just give an example. I'm not trying to endorse, I'm not trying to say it, but just look at the Mamu. We have a huge amount of real mushrooms in Mamu. I personally like that, and hence I came up with that. Don't take it as an endorsement, I'm sorry. And the last but not least, price is important, but taste is game changer. That's going to be the, like somebody said, I don't want to go into that story, but like I said before, price is important, but taste is definitely a game changer for a long-term play. I mean, if it's a quick in and exit, that's a different story, but if you want to really create a good sustainable product, taste. And last but not least, this came up in a conversation that we are having before that, when you engage chefs, make sure you take care of them. You know what I mean?
For me is never forget the vision, right? Even for us as chefs, never forget where you came from, never forget your original vision. Every time we speak to somebody who's a founder of an alt meat company, it's always about they want to change the world for a better place. Never forget that. Always give back to community, keep building community, keep showcasing your product for all cultures and all people, not just a certain percent. So try to stay as accessible as you can, and never forget that you are building a better future. You know, climate change is real. A lot of things are changing for the worse, but you guys are on the forefront to make things better and give more access, give more food security, especially for the youth, who we advocate a lot for with companies that we work with. So never forget, again, always work from the heart and make things and see the future for a better place. So, and we are here for you. We're here to make your delicious products seen in so many different communities and build some love into it.
Yeah, I mean, all of that, similar feelings there. If there's one thing I could leave you with, and I like, hearing how many chefs there are in the crowd, and mostly alternative protein companies here. Guys, listen to this right here, right? We chefs are the first line of defense to delicious food, right? We are the trusted voice in the industry. People come to our restaurants, they walk into the door, they pay us money, we cook them food. They trust us, right? It was only about 2 decades ago that I think finally chefs started to come out of the kitchens and get some shine on themselves, right? Get a little bit of celebrityness, like the chefs are the new rock stars, right? So we're past that era right now, right? Then we've moved on to a trusted voice in advocacy, right? For really important things, on the Farm Bill, for instance, and we've seen this chef evolution. If you guys are running alternative protein companies right now and you do not have a chef involved in your program, right, in some shape or form, you are doing yourself a massive disservice. And I'm coming in hard to you because I like to prop chefs up. We often get, we're often the last of the party, but we're the ones starting the party, right? And what I have found with with the few companies that I've worked on, we've been able to really take these companies where sometimes they're missing some of that soul, some of that deliciousness, some of that flavor, something about the product isn't just hitting right, and we're able to turn it around and really help them put a product in front that will perform properly, that will hold properly, that's cost effective, and do right by it. So if you guys do not have chefs involved, my big takeaway here is get us involved. We love to do this. We're curious people. We're very innovative, and ultimately, we really want this to succeed. So, yeah.
I love that. What an amazing note to end on. And I think also you obviously represent different segments of food service from one another, and there are many others, and learning about the chefs before you approach them, right? Chef Sri has different preferences than Chef Spike and Chef Nelson, and doing that research and continuing that collaboration and getting these tastemakers, these food culture influencers on board early. So with that, let's all chat, find these wonderful chefs during the food festival while we're eating food, and thank you so much.